The ice came down hard that November, the kind that turns the Trans-Canada into a mirror and makes the spruce trees bow like penitents. North of Kenora, where the highway narrows and the Canadian Shield pushes up through the earth like old bone, a man named Terence— no, that name was taken. A man named Reid sat behind the wheel of his F-250 and watched the world turn white and indifferent, the way it had been doing for 2 years now, ever since the morning he came home to a house that was still warm but already empty. Reid Calloway had served 22 years in the Canadian Armed Forces, the last 8 attached to Joint Task Force 2. Canada's answer to the kind of work no one talks about at dinner. He had been in places that didn't appear on the maps they show civilians. He had made decisions in the dark that he still carried in the light. And when he retired to the house on Birchwind Lake that he and his wife Sybil had bought together, half-finished and full of promise, he had believed, the way a man believes in something he has not yet tested, that he would finally learn to be still. Sybil died in March, a Tuesday. The tulips she had planted along the front walk were just beginning to push through the frost, and Reid had noticed them that morning before he drove her to the appointment, and he thought, she will like that when she sees them on the way back. She never saw them on the way back. He had been driving the same stretch of highway for 2 years now, not going anywhere in particular, just driving. The truck was something to do with his hands. The road was something to put his eyes on. In motion, the grief sat differently. It flattened out, became almost manageable, like a stone in the pocket instead of a stone on the chest. That Tuesday evening in November, the storm had been building since noon. Reid had driven down to Dryden for hardware supplies he didn't strictly need, and now he was heading back north, with the wind pushing sideways across the road and the temperature gauge reading -22. The heater was running full. The radio had gone to static somewhere back near Vermilion Bay. He didn't bother with it. He had stopped needing noise to fill the silence sometime in the fall, and he wasn't sure whether that was peace or something closer to surrender. He almost didn't see them. They were on the shoulder just past the turnoff for Minnetonka Lake Road, a dark shape against the snow, low to the ground, and at first his mind said deer and his foot eased off the gas, and then the headlights caught it properly, and his mind said dog and his foot went to the brake. She was sitting in the snow with her legs tucked under her, a large shepherd cross with a coat that had gone dark and matted with cold and wet. She wasn't shaking. That was what Reid noticed first, and what alarmed him. She had stopped shaking, which meant she had stopped fighting. But she was upright, and her ears were tracking him as he slowed the truck to a crawl, and around her, pressed into the hollow of her body, were 3 puppies who could not have been more than 5 or 6 weeks old. Reid pulled over. He sat for a moment with the engine running and the hazard lights blinking orange into the dark and the snow. He had not touched a dog since Warrant. That was the other thing he carried. Not just Sybil, but Warrant, the Belgian Malinois he had worked with for 6 years overseas, who had been killed in a courtyard in a country he still couldn't name in any official capacity, 3 months before Reid's retirement. 2 losses in 2 years, the kind of arithmetic that doesn't balance. He got out of the truck. The cold hit him like a door swung open. He walked to the front of the truck so she could see him in the headlights, and he crouched down and he waited. He had learned patience from the military and grief had refined it. He did not move toward her. He let her read him. She was a shepherd mix, some husky in there, Reid thought, from the set of the ears and the pale markings around the eyes. She was thin beneath the wet coat, the kind of thin that spoke of weeks, not days. Her puppies were pressed so tightly against her that they appeared to be one animal, a small dense pile of fur and fast breathing. One of them made a sound, high and thin, and the mother's eyes moved to it briefly and then back to Reid. "All right," he said. Not to her, exactly, to the night. He went back to the truck and pulled his work coat from the back seat. A heavy Carhartt blanket-lined thing that Sybil had given him for his 52nd birthday. He had not worn it since the funeral. It still smelled of the cedar closet where she kept it. He stood for a moment with his face in it, in the dark on the side of the highway with the transport trucks blowing past and the snow coming sideways, and then he folded it over his arm and walked back. She let him come closer this time. 3 feet. 2. He set the coat on the snow between them and sat back on his heels and put his hands in his lap and looked away from her, at the tree line, at nothing. The trick Warrant's trainer had taught him: don't take, offer, and look away and let them decide. She decided in about 4 minutes. He heard the snow compress under her weight and felt her breath on the back of his hand before he saw her. And when he turned his head, she was close enough that he could see the gray at her muzzle, finer than frost. She put her nose to the coat and then looked at him. "Yeah," he said. "It's warm. Come on." It took another 10 minutes to get all 3 puppies into the truck. The mother rode in the back seat with them, pressed against the door, watching him in the rearview mirror with an expression Reid could only describe as cautious willingness, which was about where he lived himself. He drove north. The house on Birchwind Lake was at the end of a gravel road that became unreliable in mud season, and nearly impassable in a storm like this one. Reid had made it worse without meaning to. He had let maintenance slide these past 2 years. The driveway and the dock and the garden beds Sybil had planned and never finished. The house was warm because he kept the heat on more out of habit than comfort, and it was clean because he could not tolerate mess. That was the military in him, but it was spare in the way that houses become when the person who made them a home is gone. He carried the puppies inside, wrapped in the Carhartt, 2 trips. The mother followed on her own, slow and deliberate, and sat in the entryway and watched him set up a space in the mudroom with old towels and a laundry basket that had been sitting empty for 2 years. He made a bed. He boiled water and let it cool and offered it in a flat dish. He found a can of salmon in the pantry, the only protein on hand, as he had been avoiding grocery runs, and opened it and set it near the mother, not too close, close enough. She ate like someone who had forgotten she was allowed to be hungry. Reid sat on the mudroom floor with his back against the washing machine and watched her and did not know what he was feeling. Something had opened up. That was all he could say about it. Something that had been shut for a long time had opened, just a crack. The way a window opens in March, when you've forgotten that air can smell like something other than cold. The puppies slept in a pile. The mother ate and then lay down among them and began to clean them, methodically, starting with the smallest one, who had a dark patch above one eye that made him look perpetually surprised. Reid watched until his eyes went heavy, and then he moved to the couch and lay down without taking off his boots, and slept for the first time in 3 weeks without waking at 2 in the morning with his heart going and Sybil's name already leaving his lips. He woke to noise. Not distress, just the shuffling, grunting, indignant noise of puppies wanting to nurse and the lower, patient sound of a mother accommodating them. Reid lay still and listened. Light was coming through the curtains. The storm had passed. He could hear the trees. He got up and made coffee and stood in the kitchen window and looked at Birchwind Lake, which had frozen early this year and lay flat and gray-white under the November sky, and he thought about what to do. He should call someone, the vet in Kenora maybe, or the SPCA. He should report a found dog. He should be logical and practical about this, the way he was logical and practical about everything else in his life. He thought about this while he drank his coffee. Then he poured a second cup and went back to the mudroom and sat on the floor. And the mother dog looked at him with those careful eyes, and he stayed there until the coffee was gone. He did not call anyone. By the 3rd day, the smallest puppy, the one with the mark above his eye, had taken to following Reid from room to room on legs that weren't entirely sure of themselves. The other 2 stayed close to their mother, but this one had made a decision about Reid that seemed final and non-negotiable, and Reid found himself adjusting his walking pace and his furniture arrangements to accommodate approximately 4 pounds of determined, wobbling dog. He named him Tag. He wasn't sure why. It came to him in the kitchen one morning and it seemed right, and he didn't overthink it. He had not named anything in a long time. On the 4th day, there was a knock at the door. Reid had not had a visitor since the summer, when his daughter Faye had driven up from Winnipeg with her husband, and stayed for 3 days that were careful and exhausting for everyone. He opened the door to find a woman standing on his porch in a red Stanfield sweater and rubber boots, holding a casserole dish covered in foil, looking at him with the direct and unsentimental expression of someone who has long since stopped being shy about showing up where they're needed. Her name was Vera Drummond. She was 67, a retired nurse, and she lived in the farmhouse at the bend in the road, 3 kilometers south, which Reid had driven past 100 times without giving much thought to. She had a face that had weathered well. Not softened, weathered, the way good timber weathers, acquiring character without losing strength. Her hair was white and pulled back, and she was not particularly concerned with what he thought of her arriving uninvited. "I saw the lights on past midnight 3 nights in a row," she said, "and I know you don't usually keep those hours so." She held out the casserole dish. Reid looked at her. "It's chicken and wild rice," she said. "I didn't put onions in it because I don't know your situation with onions. Some people have a thing." He stepped back from the door. She came in and she saw the dog immediately, and something moved across her face that was quick and private. "Oh," she said. The mother dog had come down the hall and was standing at a distance, watching. Vera crouched down, not reaching, just crouching, offering the same lowered posture Reid had offered on the roadside, and waited. "Found her on the highway," Reid said. 4 days ago, 3 pups." "I know," Vera said. "I mean, I didn't know, but I thought it might be something like that." She was still watching the dog. "She's a shepherd cross. Malinois, I'd say, from the face." She glanced up at him. "You worked with Malinois." He hadn't told her that. He wasn't sure what he'd told anyone up here. "How did you know?" "Your daughter mentioned it. She came by in August to ask if I'd check on you now and then." Vera straightened. "I've been respecting your privacy, but a week felt long enough." Reid didn't know what to say to that. He took the casserole dish and carried it to the kitchen. And she followed, and he put the kettle on because it seemed like the thing to do, and for a while neither of them said anything, which was less uncomfortable than he would have expected. She had lost her husband 12 years ago. He found this out slowly, over the course of the next hour, not because she offered it, but because she answered questions honestly when he asked them. Her husband had been a game warden out near Lac Seul. Heart attack, alone in the bush. She had kept the farm because there was no alternative she could tolerate. She had 3 grandchildren in Winnipeg and 1 in Thunder Bay, and she drove to see them when the roads allowed and called on Sundays otherwise. "Do you miss it?" Reid asked. "Having someone." Vera considered this with the same seriousness she seemed to give to most things. "I miss him," she said. "That's not quite the same question. Missing someone, the idea of company, the fact of not being alone that I've made my peace with. Missing him specifically is something else. That doesn't go away, it just changes shape." Reid looked at his coffee mug. "You don't have to have made your peace with it yet," she said. 2 years isn't very long. People think it should be longer by 2 years. It isn't. Tag had found his way under the kitchen table and was sitting on Reid's foot. Reid looked down at him. "He followed me here," he said about the puppy. "From the mudroom. Dogs know," Vera said. "Know what? Who needs following?" She left before dark, the way she'd arrived, directly, without ceremony, with a straightforwardness that Reid found he did not mind. She did not ask if she could come back. She did not offer to come back. She simply said she'd left her number on the casserole dish lid, if he needed the vet's contact in Kenora, and then she put on her coat and her boots and walked out to her truck. He watched her taillights disappear into the tree line. The mother dog had come to stand beside him at the door. "Yeah," Reid said. He didn't call her for 9 days. Not because he was being proud or careful. He simply needed the time to understand what was happening to him, which was that he was starting to want things again. Small things. To know how the puppies were going to grow. To tell someone what Tag had done that morning, climbed onto the couch and positioned himself with great seriousness against Reid's ribs and fallen asleep there, breathing against him with a total and unquestioned certainty of welcome. To ask Vera what she meant, exactly, when she said grief changes shape, he called on the 9th day. He asked about the vet, that was the pretext, and then they talked for an hour about nothing in particular, about the lake and the coming winter, and a great gray owl she'd seen in the birches that morning, and Reid found himself at the kitchen window, watching the ice on Birchwind Lake with something moving in his chest that he did not try to name yet. He drove the mother dog and the puppies to Kenora. The vet, a young woman named Dr. Asante, who wore her hair in 2 braids and spoke to the animals in a low continuous murmur while she worked, confirmed that the mother was malnourished but otherwise sound, and the puppies were healthy, and that the mother was approximately 3 years old and had been, from the state of her paws, outside for several weeks at least. Any interest in rehoming them? Dr. Asante asked. Not pushing, just asking. The puppies will be ready in another few weeks. The shepherd organizations would take them. Reid looked at the mother dog, who was looking at him. I'll keep the mother, he said. The puppies? I'll think about the puppies. He didn't think very long. Tag stayed. He found homes for the other two through a woman at the Kenora SPCA who knew a family in Dryden and a retired teachers in Sioux Lookout who had, she said, been thinking about a dog for some years and just needed the right occasion. Reid drove them himself, 3 weeks before Christmas, and on the way home stopped at the turnoff for Minnetonka Lake Road and sat there for a moment with the engine running. He thought about the night he had pulled over, the way the headlights had caught the mother dog through the snow, the way she had been sitting upright, still, not shaking, trying to hold on. He thought about how it had not occurred to him in that moment to keep driving. He had kept driving for 2 years, after Sybil, after Warrant. He had pointed himself north and driven and called it coping, and maybe it had been for a while. But you can't stay in motion forever. Eventually the road ends, or the storm comes down, or you see something on the shoulder that makes you stop. He named the mother dog Sable. He told himself it was for her coloring, the dark undercoat, the way she went almost black in the rain. And that was partly true. But Sybil's mother had called her Sable sometimes, a childhood nickname, and Reid had always loved it, the sound of it, the way it settled in the mouth like something solid. Sable did not object to the name. She seemed, in fact, to accept it with the same quiet gravity with which she accepted most things. Reid's early morning silences, his occasional need to sit outside in temperatures that were not sensible, his habit of talking to her at length about matters that were not her concern. She listened without judgment. She stayed close without crowding. She had, Reid thought, an unusual ability to be present without making demands of the presence, which was something he had valued in Sybil and had not expected to find again in anything living. Vera came for Christmas, not invited. Exactly. She called and said she was making a roast, and there was too much of it, and Reid said he had a bottle of something decent. And by the time they were through talking, it had been decided without anyone having made a decision. She brought her dog too, a 12-year-old beagle named Hector, who moved slowly and with great dignity, and spent the evening on the rug by the wood stove in a state of profound contentment. They ate and talked, and at some point in the evening the conversation turned to the past, not with difficulty, the way those conversations usually went for Reid, but easily, the way water finds its level. He talked about Sybil. Vera talked about her husband. They talked about Warrant, about what it is to lose an animal who has trusted you with its life and vice versa. And Reid found that he could talk about it now without the particular tightening in the chest that used to come with it, the sensation of a door swinging shut. Tag was asleep on his foot. Sable was against his leg. Outside, Birchwind Lake held the ice and the dark and the cold, and the spruce trees stood in their rows, and the stars were very clear the way they are only in winter in the north. I almost didn't stop, Reid said. It was late. The fire had gone low, on the highway. I saw them and I almost kept driving. Vera looked at him, not with surprise, with the expression of someone who knows what it costs to say a thing out loud. But you didn't, she said. No, that's the part that matters. Reid was quiet for a moment. Tag shifted on his foot, made a small sound, went still again. I think I thought, Reid said slowly, for a long time after Sybil, that nothing I did mattered that much anymore, that the things I chose had stopped having real consequences. He paused, and then I stopped on the side of the highway in a snowstorm and brought a half-frozen dog home, and things started having consequences again. Vera nodded. She was not the kind of woman who filled silences they didn't need to be filled. Grief does that, she said, takes the weight out of choices, makes everything feel provisional. And then something small happens and the weight comes back and it's… She looked at Hector on the rug. It's heavy, at first, but it's better than the lightness. Reid thought about this for a long time after she left, driving her careful way down the Birchwind Road in the clear cold, her taillights going orange through the trees and then gone. He thought about weight, about what it meant to be pulled back into the specific gravity of a life. This cup, this dog, this floor, this window, this lake. He thought about the morning the tulips pushed through and Sybil had not seen them. He thought about Warrant in the courtyard, the last time, and the way the morning had felt afterward, too bright and too quiet. He thought about the mother dog on the shoulder of the highway, upright in the snow, not shaking. The next morning he drove to Kenora and bought 2 things: a dog bed for Tag, who had been sleeping on the couch and showed no intention of changing this arrangement but deserved the option, and a piece of hardwood, birch, for the name of the lake and the trees he had looked at every morning for 2 years, learning not to be dead. He drove home with the windows cracked despite the cold and Sable on the back seat and Tag in the passenger footwell, trying to climb into his lap at regular intervals, which Reid allowed more often than was wise. That evening he built a fire and sat at the table with the block of birch and a set of gouges he'd had since his father died and never much used, and he began to carve. He was not skilled at it. He would not pretend otherwise, but the shape he wanted was simple, and the work was slow and required his hands and his attention, which was what he needed. Something to do with his hands and his attention other than drive. By spring, when the ice went out and the birches came back and the tulips he had planted along the front walk, planted them himself for the first time. In the fall, without knowing quite why, pushed through the frost at the edge of April, the sign was finished. He hung it above the gate at the end of the drive. Vera came the following Saturday and stood at the road and read it, and he watched her from the porch. It said only, Birchwind. The name they had always given the house, Sybil and he, the name that had never been formally posted anywhere, only said between them, the way some names are private until they aren't. Vera stood there a moment, then she nodded once, the way she did when something was right, and walked up the drive. Sable came off the porch to meet her. Tag followed, ears too big for his head still, feet too big for the rest of him, stumbling cheerfully in the frozen mud. The lake was open at the edges, and the geese were coming back, and the sky was that particular pale blue of a Canadian morning, in the first week that deserves to be called spring, not merely the last week that deserves to be called winter. Reid went down the steps to meet them.